why is all this stuff happening? Why do we do what we do every day? I think everyone has at some point and wonder, why is all this here? And why are we going through all this? Well, we have an answer, and it's from the wisest man who ever lived, but with the exception of Jesus, of course. And this man was the third king of Israel, and his name was Solomon. And we know he's the wisest man who ever lived, or we could say probably, because of a section in 1 Kings chapter 3. And we'll see where his wisdom comes from. So if you want to turn to 1 Kings chapter 3, we'll start in verse 4. So, at this point, in the previous chapter, Solomon's father David has passed away. And before he passed away, he called Solomon in and gave him a bunch of instructions about what to do. And so Solomon is just barely king. He's been king a very short time at this point. So starting in chapter 4, or verse 4 of chapter 3. And the king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was the great high place. Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings on the altar. In Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream at night, and God said, "Ask what you wish me to give you." So this is the proverbial genie showing up and offering you a wish, except it's really happening, and it's God with Solomon. So God is saying, "What do you wish me to give you?" And so it continues in verse 6. Then Solomon said, "Thou hast shown great loving kindness to thy servant David my father, according as he walked before thee in truth and righteousness and uprightness of heart toward thee. And thou hast reserved for him this great loving kindness, that thou hast given him a son to sit on his throne, as it is this day. And now, O Lord my God, thou hast made thy servant king in this place of my father David, yet I am but a little child. I do not know how to go out or come in." So at this point, Solomon is 20 years old. And if you've ever gone from a place of a follower to a place of a leader, you know it gets really scary at the beginning when you don't realize at that point you know nothing. And so it continues in verse 8. And thy servant is in the midst of thy people, which thou hast chosen, a great people who cannot be numbered or counted for multitude. So give thy servant an understanding heart to judge thy people, to discern between good and evil. For who is able to judge this great people of thine? So here we see what Solomon asks for from God. And he says, an understanding heart to judge thy people, to discern between good and evil. And in verse 10, God answers, "And it was pleasing in the sight of the Lord that Solomon had asked this thing. And God said to him, Because you have asked this thing, and have not asked for yourself long life, nor have asked for yourself riches for yourself, nor have you asked for the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself discernment to understand justice. Behold, I have done according to your words. Behold, I have given you a wise and discerning heart, so that there has been no one like you before you, nor shall one like you arise after you." So here God is promising to make him the wisest ever. "And I have also given you what you have not asked, both riches and honor, so that there will not be any among the kings like you in all your days. And if you walk in my ways, keeping my statutes and commandments, as your father David walked, then I will prolong your days." And Solomon awoke, and behold, it was a dream. And he came to Jerusalem and stood before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and offered burnt offerings, and made peace offerings, and made a feast for all his servants. So here we have the setup of Solomon in all his wisdom, and because he asked for wisdom, God granted him so much beyond that. Wealth, honor, and he says, he gives him a conditional promise as well. He says, I'll give you long life if you follow my commands. And so Solomon goes on and has a successful kingship. But what I want to talk about today, like I said, is the meaning of life. And the book of Ecclesiastes is interesting in this, is because we have Solomon, the wisest man, discussing the meaning of life throughout the book of Ecclesiastes. So if you want to turn to Ecclesiastes, we'll take a look at that. So if you've read any of the writings of Solomon, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, Solomon has a very unique approach in the Bible, in that a lot of his writing is very personal and covers a variety of topics, many of which are very practical in nature. He talks about investing, he talks about romance, he talks about business administration, any number of variety of things having to do with daily life and what people need to do to be successful and wise. And that's something that's valued in this life. People are always reaching out and buying books by people that they consider to be wise and looking for advice and self-help. And here we have some from the wisest man who ever lived. So the word Ecclesiastes, just as a note, means something akin to teacher. It's a Greek word, and it's a translation of a Hebrew word, but it basically means teacher. And throughout Ecclesiastes, Solomon refers to himself as teacher. But we'll begin in chapter 1, and this one you'll understand, and you probably know this already. There's a phrase, all is vanity, or all is meaningless. And you hear that a lot in chapter 1. And if you look in verse 9 of chapter 1, verse 9 also has another famous phrase from Ecclesiastes, something that's shown up in literature and has been known since the time of Ecclesiastes was written. That which has been is that which will be, and that which has been done is that which will be done. So there's nothing new under the sun. And that's something a lot of people refer to over the years. We've all seen this before. Things come around, history repeats itself. There's nothing new. It's all the same thing recurring over and over. But let's continue on and look at a little more in chapter 1. Let's look at verses 16 to 18. And throughout this Ecclesiastes, understand that it's a little bit of an arc. So Solomon is kind of going through his mental steps and his experiments with different things about life as it goes along. So it's not, he changes his opinions as he goes along from time to time. So he'll say different things. And so it's important that we don't take verses out of context in Ecclesiastes, because you'll get some weird ones for sure. But let's go to verse 16. I have said to myself, behold, I have magnified and increased wisdom more than all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my mind has observed a wealth of wisdom and knowledge. And I set my mind to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I realize this is also striving after wind, because in much wisdom there is much grief, and in increased knowledge results in increasing pain. So this is an interesting phrase, because it relates to a phrase that we know, which is ignorance is bliss. And that's what he's saying here. Much wisdom in much wisdom there is much grief, and increasing knowledge results in increasing pain. So here at the beginning, he's advocating for ignorance because it's less painful. So Solomon goes through a series of experiments, and he approaches it that way. And so in chapter 2, he talks about a few things, which of course we know from general knowledge are all meaningless. And he covers quite a few, and we'll just touch on them a little bit, but I'll start in verses 1 through 4. I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure. So enjoy yourself, and behold, it too is futility. So right here he's saying, let's try out pleasure. Let's see if that has a meaning to it. In verse 2, I said of laughter, it is madness, and of pleasure, what does it accomplish? I explored with my mind how to stimulate my body with wine, whilst my mind was guiding me wisely, and how to take hold of folly until I could see what good there is for the sons of men to do under heaven the few years of their lives. I enlarged my works, I built houses for myself, I planted vineyards for myself. So he covers quite a bit right here. He covers pleasure, he covers wine, he covers laughter, and he covers building projects and increasing the size of his holdings. And he says, and he finds it all meaningless. And we'll continue on to verses 10 and 11. And talking again about pleasure. And all that my eyes desired, I did not refuse them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart was pleased because of all my labor, and this was my reward for all my labor. Thus I considered all my activities which my hands had done, and labor which I had exerted, and behold, all was vanity and striving after wind, and there was no profit under the sun. And so here he's saying, I worked hard, and I went after pleasure, and I created things, and I built things, and I worked, and none of it really meant anything. He calls it striving after wind. And if you're to chase the wind, if you catch it, what do you catch? Nothing. There's nothing there to catch. Verse 14. The wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet I know that one fate befalls them both. So here he's saying, whether you're wise or whether you're foolish, everybody dies in the end. So what difference does it make? And you can hear a little bit in his voice kind of the frustration that he's saying as he's pursuing these things. And we hear it in our normal lives, and we hear those we know. People who are focusing on how to be happy. They're chasing happiness. And that's what he's doing here. And he's being frustrated as he keeps trying things. And the amazing thing is, Solomon has every possible resource to chase happiness, and he's not finding it. He's the wisest man. He's wealthy. He has everything he could imagine. He can create anything he wants to, build anything he wants to, and do whatever he wants to, and it's not working for him. Verse 17, so I hated life, for the work which had been done under the sun was grievous to me, because everything is futility and striving after wind. Pretty rough approach he's got going on. Let's turn to chapter 3. We'll keep moving. This is a well-known section of verses, and so I'll just read through it real quick. But I think it's an important kind of change in his mindset as he goes along. There is an appointed time for everything, and there is a time for every event under heaven, a time to give birth and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to shun embracing, a time to search and a time to give up as lost, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear apart and a time to sew together, a time to be silent, a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. Here he's saying something obvious, which is there's a time for everything. Life goes through its ups and downs, and there's the balance that you find between the different aspects of life, which he covers here. Let's go on to chapter 3, verse 17, just a few more verses down. And here he says, I said to myself, God will judge both the righteous man and the wicked man, for a time for every matter and every deed is there. So he says, no matter what happens, we're all getting judged in the end. So we've got, he continues with this, in the end, what does it matter? Everyone's getting judged, and in the end, whether you're wise or foolish, everyone dies. So we're continuing in this vein. Chapter 4 is about the evils in this world and oppression. And a lot about Ecclesiastes is how difficult life is and how much struggle and pain we go through and how very little of it really means much of anything. Which is a tough way to look at life, because most people can survive any number of disappointments and difficulties if there's a meaning to it. If there's a reason and a meaning for your suffering, it helps a lot in your mentality. And here we're seeing Solomon saying, well, it doesn't really mean much of anything. In chapter 6 is a funny one. In this Bible, it's titled The Futility of Life. And essentially the main idea is anything can happen and you never know, and so what can you do? You never know what's going to happen. Chapter 7, he starts changing his tune a little bit in chapter 7. So I'll read 1 through 5 in chapter 7. A good name is better than a good ointment, and the day of one's death is better than the day of one's birth. It is better to go to a house of mourning than to go to a house of feasting, because that is the end of every man, and the living takes it to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for when a face is sad, a heart may be happy. The mind of the wise is in the house of mourning, while the mind of fools is in the house of pleasure. It is better to listen to the rebuke of a wise man than for one to listen to the song of fools. For as the cracking of thorn bushes under a pot, so is the laughter of the fool, and this too is futility. Essentially, in this section, he's starting to come around on wisdom. He's starting to say, well, maybe wisdom isn't totally useless. Maybe it means something, and maybe taking action based on that, putting aside pleasure and thinking more about life has its positivities. Chapter 8, title is Obey the King, or Obey Rulers. And there's kind of a little bit of a double meaning to this, because Solomon is king, but also he's referring to God. But he's referring to powerful people or God, and referring to how do people behave in front of them. Because who are we to tell God anything? But I'll read just a little bit out of chapter 8. Who is like the wise man, and who knows the interpretation of a matter? A man's wisdom illuminates him and causes his stern face to beam. So a little more positivity about wisdom. I say, keep the command of the king because of the oath before God. Do not be in a hurry to leave him. Do not join in an evil matter, for he will do whatever he pleases. Since the word of the king is authoritative, who will say to him, what are you doing? He who keeps a royal command experiences no trouble, for a wise heart knows the proper time and procedure. For there is a proper time and procedure for every delight, when a man's trouble is heavy upon him. move on to verse 15 of chapter 8. There's another little bit. So I commended pleasure, for there is nothing good for a man under the sun, except to eat and drink and to be merry. And though this will stand by him in his toils throughout the days of his life, which God has given him under the sun. So now he's starting to take a turn a little bit again on pleasure and saying, well, if it's all meaningless, you might as well enjoy some of it, some of the things God has given us to enjoy, because why not? We're here, and these are the things that God has given us. So he's taking a more measured approach. But he's also taking a measured approach to pleasure. He's not saying just go crazy. Chapter 9. I'll read 1 through 4. For I have taken all this to my heart and explain it, that righteous men, wise men, and their deeds are in the hand of God. Man does not know whether it will be love or hatred. Anything awaits him. It is the same for all. There is one fate for the righteous and for the wicked, for the good, for the clean, and for the unclean, for the man who offers a sacrifice, for the one who does not sacrifice. As the good man is, so is the sinner. As the swearer is, so is the one who is afraid to swear. This is an evil in all that is done under the sun, that there is one fate for all men. Furthermore, the hearts of the sons of men are full of evil, and insanity is in their hearts throughout their lives. Afterwards, they go to the dead. So he's kind of flip-flopping a little bit again, saying whether you're righteous or whether you're evil, we all wind up dead, and and it doesn't really matter that much. But he's also giving a little bit of practical advice in here, in that the judgment is coming, and we need to keep that in our minds. Let's go to verse 17 and 18 in the same chapter. The words of the wise heard in the quietness are better than the shouting of a ruler among fools. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. So here he's going back again to wisdom and starting to paint it more in a more positive light. Wisdom is better than weapons in war, but one sinner destroys much good. Chapter 10. I know I'm reading a lot, and it's a lot of verses, but I think I really enjoy this, and I think it's a lot of good stuff from a very wise man that God blessed amazingly. Chapter 10, I'm going to read verse 19. Men prepare a meal for enjoyment, and wine makes life merry, and money is the answer to everything. So you can see this is a drastic change from earlier when he had tried pleasure and thought it was all horrible, and food doesn't matter, wine doesn't matter, money doesn't matter, and now he's going back again. So don't take it out of context, because it's obviously he keeps moving around a bit. In chapter 11, you may have heard, cast your bread onto the waters. That's where this comes from. So verse 1, cast your bread onto the surface of the waters, for you will find it after many days. Divide your portion to 7 or even 8, for you do not know what misfortune may occur on the earth. So this is a section about investing, and basically he's saying diversify your investments, which if you do 401k or retirement or anything, that's what you get. That's the advice you get from all the people who know. Diversify your investments. So he's saying divide up your assets into 7 pieces or even 8. Put them in different investments, and you'll get a return on your investment. Maybe because if one fails, you've got the others, or if several fail, you have the others. And that's the whole point of diversifying your investments. And the other part of this chapter is remember your Creator. And let me see. Verse 9, rejoice, young man, during your childhood, and let your heart be pleasant during the days of young manhood, and follow the impulses of your heart and the desires of your eyes. Yet know God will bring you to judgment for all these things. So remove vexation from your heart and put away pain from your body, because childhood and the prime of life are fleeting. Chapter 12, this is the last chapter, so we're wrapping up, and we're getting to the meaning of life here. So we've gone a long way, and I know, but we're nearly there. 1 through 7. Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come, and all the years draw nigh, when you will say, I have no delight in them. Before the sun, the light, the moon, and the stars are darkened, and clouds return after the rain. In the day that the watchmen of the house tremble, and mighty men stoop, the grinding ones stand idle, because they are few, and those who look through the windows grow dim. And the doors on the street are shut, as the sound of the grinding mill is low, and one will arise at the sound of the bird, and all the daughters of song will sing softly. Furthermore, men are afraid of high place, and of terrors on the road, and almond tree blossoms, and the grasshopper drags himself along, and the caperberry is ineffective, for man goes to his eternal home, while mourners go about in the street. He just goes into poetry. It's amazing. The writing is there's so much imagery in this section. Verse 6, remember him before the silver cord is broken, and the golden bowl is crushed. The pitcher by all the well is shattered, and the wheel at the cistern is crushed. And the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher, all is vanity. It's an interesting section. Remember God in your youth. Focus on God. Enjoy that part of your life. And as you grow older and older, there's more problems and difficulties that will beset you. But you'll be on a good course. All right. So let's read verse 13 and 14, and here we are at the end of Ecclesiastes. This is the conclusion. So this is the answer that everyone wants to know, and everyone's searching for in all of life. What's the meaning of life? Here it comes. This is the conclusion, when all has been heard, is fear God and keep his commandments, because this applies to every person. For God will bring every act to judgment, everything which is hidden, whether it is good or evil. So here's the conclusion, that life is meaningless without God, that all that we do is meaningless, except that we need to be following the commandments of God. Fear God and keep his commandments, because this applies to every person. That's what we do, or attempt to do every day. That's what the main message is of this. And that's what gives meaning to our lives. It's not our work, it's not our money, it's not our pleasure. And that can be neither here nor there. That can be a bad thing or a good thing, and it doesn't really matter, but it's how we apply the commandments and how we live according to the commandments of God. And I think this is hugely important, and I also think that this is really what people are looking for. So many people are looking for meaning, and they're reaching out to find meaning. They're reaching out to find happiness, and this is what it's all about right here. So one of the commandments of God is to believe and be baptized. And so if you find yourself with the need of being baptized, and you believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, we ask you to come forward